see that green chair, and even on Sunday, the hope that he'll be there. And that green chair will be empty now with Don. And so that was sad news for me today. The scripture speaks of the least of these. Today, I may be representing those we would consider to be the least of these. And no doubt we have all kinds of judgment when we see somebody who looks like me with cardboard signs indicating their need and who they are. We have all kinds of things. I don't know if what you thought of when you saw the pastor and heard his voice and saying, oh my goodness, what's he doing today? You know, and from the neck up, this is how I look when I get out of bed. It's not a pretty sight. I look like this intentionally, on purpose. But there are those who look like this unintentionally. I thought about how I would prepare for today's sermon, and Sue and I were saying, what if you camped out at the church, slept on the patio? And I said, well, I could just do it at home, sleep on the patio. I didn't sleep on the patio. I slept in a nice warm bed. But I have to tell you, I was very mindful of those who at the very same time were sleeping, were cold. Those people I see every day coming to church, holding a cardboard sign saying, please help, or homeless, the least of these. Now, one of the things that we need to understand is that, as we discovered from the scripture, is that, and we can see, is that those who are the least of these, we need to know and understand that Jesus cares for the least of these in a very real and powerful way. For whoever says, because remember, he said, if you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. Done it unto me. This parable comes at a very interesting time in the scripture, for Jesus is talking about the end times, the times when, in the great judgment. And so we have this amazing story about what it means, how to treat each other, and what God is asking from us in the context of a judgment, in a context of what you and I will be judged upon. It's very interesting and very strange that he has that. We have this image of the king, and Jesus is the king. And all the nations are going to come before him, and I believe that this is absolutely true. But the story goes on that he called all the nations before him, and he separated the nations. Just separated the people. Some he put on his right hand, and some he put on his left hand. Like a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Because they're different from each other. They're different from one another. And then he identifies their difference. He says, to the right, enter into my kingdom. Because you're different. This is what makes you different. When I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was naked, you gave me something to wear. When I was sick or in prison, you came to me. And they said, when did we do that? Well, if you did it unto the least of these, my brothers, you've done it unto me. And then we know what he said to those on his left. We called them the goats. You know what he said? He said, you didn't do these things. You didn't feed me when I was hungry. me drink. You didn't clothe me when I was naked. You didn't visit me when I was sick or in prison. And you didn't welcome me when I was a stranger in your midst. Well, when did we do that? If you didn't do it to the least of these, you didn't do it to me. What is he identifying? To the ones on the right, he's identifying a heart condition. He is identifying the condition of their heart. That these were those who just did what they needed to do, not out of compulsion, not because it was the Lord, but because they were people and they were in need. And they met that need out of a heart full of compassion. Because what identified it, what makes them different, was the confirmation, what was in their heart, the transformation of their heart and who they are. God is interested, and the citizens of heaven are made up of transformed people. Transformed people, not just churchgoers, but people transformed from the inside out. And from the inside out, what it affects people who we even would call the least of these. Even the least of these. Who is the least of these? Now, one thing that I don't want to have happen today. I don't want this to be a make you feel guilty sermon. I don't want that. We have a list that Jesus put out of what he would consider the least of these. Those who are hungry, those who are thirsty, those who are naked. That we could consider them as being indications of what it means to be poor. And in order to bring them comfort, in order to bless them, we would meet their physical needs. We would give them clothing. We would give them shelter. We would give them food and water. And we would meet their needs and bring them physical needs by giving them something. And then he identifies those who are sick, strangers in our midst, and those who are in prison. And how do we comfort them? Jesus said, because you visit them, you come to me. We give them ourselves, as opposed to giving them clothing and drink. To the stranger, to the prisoner, to those who are sick, we give of ourselves. We give our time. All of these needs are being met. Now, this is not an exclusive list. There's all kinds of things we could put on this list. Of course, there's being hungry. There's also this. Those who are wounded. Wounded in their spirit. Wounded in their physical body. Any of these could make us feel the least of these. What about being a single parent? Feeling the least of these. Anything that makes us feel on the outside. Anything that makes us feel on the outskirts. Anything that keeps us from being a part of the club. I remember being a part of a church, a very large church, very good church, very productive church, but I felt on the outside. And this was always very evident to me because this church is such a big church that it had a little cafe. And all the staff, 30 or 40 of us, would gather around the table and gather at the cafe to have lunch. And I would look over, and I don't want to, this is not to make you feel sorry for me, but you can if you want to. But even that place, I felt like the least of these. Because I would look over and I'd have my lunch, and I'd buy my lunch. And there would be a large table, and it would be filled with all the young people. All the pastors, the youth pastors, the technical whiz kids who were on our staff, and they were all together at this big, huge table. And others who looked like them were a part of their different ministries. They would bring their lunch and they would come over, and I would see them make a place for them around the table. And I would come and I would sit at another table, and quite often I would sit by myself. And I would look at that big table. And there would be part of me, and I know I'm in my 40s and 50s at the time, and you needed to put your big boy britches on, and, you know, and suck it up, as they say, and deal with it. And I did. But I couldn't help but feeling how good I would feel if somebody said, "Pastor Joel, come join us." Nobody did. Made me feel like I didn't really belong. But we all have that feeling. And we could list all these things. And I don't know what made you feel like the least of these. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is, but you can write your word on this. You can write your own little cardboard sign that expresses your need, what you're feeling. Loneliness. The lonely. You have to watch a beloved spouse spiral down into ill health. Your own sickness or your own illness makes you feel like the least of these. Your own condition, whatever that may be, the mourning of a deep loss of a loved one, makes us feel kind of on the outside, widowed. And 20 years is a long time for me. There are many things to feel like the least of these. But the beauty of this is, regardless of whether our circumstances in society, or regardless of our circumstances, I don't know what goes on this for you, but regardless of whatever you would write on this, there is the deep understanding that we need to know about. There's a phrase that Jesus writes and that Jesus says when he says in the scripture, "If you've done it unto the least of these, my brothers." Now, it can be, we can take it easily to mean that addressing the people he's addressing to. If you've done it unto the least of these, comma, my brothers, you've done it unto me. But I think it's more than that. I think what he is saying when he says, "If you've done it unto the least of these, my brothers," without the commas, he is identifying himself with them. He is, by that phrase, he is bringing them and identifying them with his family. That they mean something to me. I identify with their oppression. I identify with their poverty. I identify with what it means to be the least of these and to be treated like the least of these. And you are my brothers. When the whole world wants to separate the undesirables from each other, the ones that believe different from us, the ones that look different from us, and act different from us, who don't say the things that people are supposed to say, good people. Oh, by the way, I couldn't help but think that when I was preparing this morning that our dear friend Kit would be rolling in her grave because I'm not wearing a tie and a coat to preach this morning to you. But I put on an old ratty sweatshirt sure with my clothes before I put them on. Just the appropriate balance won't grind. But Jesus doesn't have those distinctions, by the way. He says, these are my brothers. These are my sisters. This is my mother. This is my father. These are my family. These are my family. I identify with their need. So, if you can write something on this sign, these cardboard signs that represent the least of these, then the good news for you and the good news for me is that Jesus identifies with you. This is a concrete example when he says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. I will always be with you till the end of the age. Regardless of your circumstances, regardless of where your sin has brought you. I identify with you. I am there. You are my brother. So much so, I identify with you. Is that whatever is done to you is done to me. He has the audacity to do that and say that. If you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. What does that do to the least of these? Now remember how this parable started, how this story started. The king will sit upon his throne in all his splendor. This is the king. In all his splendor, his glory, his beauty, his riches, his magnificence is presented to the nations like that. And then in the story he says, if you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. That means if we are the least of these, then we identify with Jesus as well. Not only in his humility, but in his splendor and his glory. What has he done to those who have called us, who we consider to be the least of these? He has elevated them up to a value that is beyond our imagination. That even in our brokenness, even in our hunger and thirst, even in our poverty, even in our feeling of being an outcast, even in our homelessness, even when we have nothing, we have everything, because the Lord of the universe considers us valuable. Valuable enough to identify himself with us. That's amazing. Now, the least of these, in the Greek, translates to mean the most inferior. And I know we've all felt that way. So what are we left with when we feel most inferior? What are we left with this and this when Jesus identifies with us? Well, let's do this. Whatever you say or write on this board, Jesus, see, this is your sign. This is not somebody else's sign. If you see somebody else's sign, this is how you treat them. When somebody sees your sign, here's your sign. When somebody sees your sign, this is how you want them to treat you. In your brokenness, in your loneliness. To treat them like Jesus. To treat you like Jesus. This is what we are compelled to do. And this is what he's saying. Now, the goats are those who need a reason to help people. They need a reason. They need a reason. They needed to know it was Jesus so they could do it to him. and for him. And that's a thing. You see, we feel like we need to do things for Jesus. Jesus, when he says this, he's not asking us to do it for him. You know, I'm working for the Lord. I'm working for the Lord. He's asking us to do it to him. As if the people in this room, everyone in this room, were Jesus himself. And what would it be like? We began to treat everybody like they were Jesus. Well, there's a story about a monastery. A monastery that was coming on hard times. And it's a allegory, if you will, that has come down, and it's called The Rabbi's Blessing. The story concerns a monastery that had fallen upon hard times, once a great order, as a result of waves of anti-monastic persecution in the 17th and 18th centuries and the rise of secularism in the 19th. All its branches and houses were lost and had become decimated to the extent there were only 5 monks left in the decaying mother house. The abbot and 4 others, all over 70 in age. Clearly, it was a dying order. In the deep woods surrounding the monastery, there was a little hut that a rabbi from a nearby town occasionally. Through their many years of prayer and contemplation, the old monks had become a bit psychic, so they could always sense when the rabbi was in his hermitage. The rabbi's in the woods. The rabbi's in the woods again, they would whisper to each other. As they agonized over the imminent death of his order, it occurred to the abbot at one such time to visit the hermitage and ask the rabbi if by some possible chance he could offer any advice that might save the monastery. The rabbi welcomed the abbot at his hut. When the abbot explained the purpose of his visit, the rabbi could only commiserate with him. "I know how it is," he exclaimed. "The spirit has gone out of people. It is the same in my town. Almost no one comes to the synagogue anymore." So the old abbot and the old rabbi wept together. Then they read parts of the Torah and quietly spoke of deep things. The time came when the abbot had to leave, and they embraced each other. "It has been a wonderful thing that we should meet after all these years," the abbot said. "But I have still failed in my purpose for coming here. Is there anything you can tell me? No piece of advice you can give me that would help me save my dying order?" "No, I am sorry," the rabbi responded. "I have no advice to give you. The only thing I can tell you is that the Messiah is one of you." When the abbot returned to the monastery, his fellow monks gathered around him to ask, "Well, what did the rabbi say?" "He couldn't help," the abbot answered. "We just wept and read the Torah together. The only thing he did say, just as I was leaving, it was something cryptic, was that the Messiah is one of us." I don't know what he meant. In the days and weeks and months that followed, the old monks pondered this and wondered whether there was any possible significance to the rabbi's word. The Messiah is one of us. Could he have possibly meant one of us monks here at the monastery? If that's the case, which one? Do you suppose he meant the abbot? Yes, he meant if he meant anyone, he probably meant Father Abbot. He has been our leader for more than a generation. On the other hand, he might have meant Brother Thomas. Certainly Brother Thomas was a holy man. Everyone knows that Thomas is the man of light. Certainly he could not mean Brother Eldred. Eldred gets crotchety at times. But come to think of it, even though he is a thorn in people's sides, when you look back on it, Eldred is virtually always right, often very right. Maybe the rabbi didn't mean Brother Eldred. Maybe the rabbi did mean Brother Eldred. But surely not Brother Philip. Philip is so passive, so a real nobody. But then almost mysteriously, he has a gift of somehow always being there when you need him. He just magically appears by your side. Maybe Philip is the Messiah. Of course, the rabbi didn't mean me. He couldn't possibly have meant me. I'm just an ordinary person. Yet supposing he did. Suppose I am the Messiah. Oh God, not me. I couldn't be that much for you, could I? As they contemplated in this manner, the old monks began to treat each other with extraordinary respect on the off chance that one among them might be the Messiah, and the off chance that each monk himself might be the Messiah. They began to treat themselves with extraordinary respect. Because the forest in which it was situated was beautiful, it so happened that people will occasionally come to visit the monastery, to picnic on its tiny lawn, to wander along some of its paths, even now, and then go into the dilapidated chapel to meditate. And as they did so, without being conscious of it, they sensed this aura of extraordinary respect that now began to surround the 5 old monks and seemed to radiate out from them and permeate the atmosphere of the place. There was something strangely attractive, even compelling about hardly knowing why. They began to come back to the monastery more frequently, to picnic, to play, to pray. They began to bring friends to show them this special place. And their friends brought their friends. Then it happened that some of the younger men who came to visit the monastery started to talk more and more with the old monks. After a while, one asked if he could join them, then another, and another. So within a few years, the monastery had once again become a thriving order, thanks to the rabbi's gift. A vibrant center of life and spirituality in the realm. This is just a story. This is just an allegory. But is it really? Is it really just a story? What would happen if those of us who bear cardboard signs that declare that we are the least of these, what would happen if all of a sudden we realized what was on the other side of that sign, and we began to treat each other like that, as if everybody was Jesus? What would happen? What would happen? Those of you who write these signs, to raise them up, the side that says Jesus. Put it to your heart. Now, the sign that says Jesus, put it to your heart. I don't have a sign for everybody, but you have it now. You have a cardboard piece of paper that has Jesus around it, on red lines. Now, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to look around. Look around at the faces. In your imagination, see those signs attached to each other's chest. That signs that say Jesus. Reminding each other that you're not Judy Wallace. You're not just Beverly Bicker. You're not just Heidi or Sue or Jim. But you're Jesus. And what would it be like to treat each other like Jesus treats us? as if we were Jesus ourselves? Would that change our language towards each other? Would that change how we listen to each other? How we look at each other? How we feel about each other? Because just imagine there may be somebody in this room that you don't get along with. And all of a sudden, they have a sign that says Jesus. Hello, my name is Jesus. They have a sign that has the name like that of the Messiah. What would happen to our little church that some say is dying? What would happen? What would happen to our community when the members of this church, and you do so well, you're halfway there anyway, you don't have very far to go. You're one of the sweetest congregations, sweetest group of people I know. You don't have very far to go. But what if the least of these, who Jesus identifies with us and attaches his name to, began to do that very thing? What would happen to us? What would happen? Now, if this message has pricked and changed our heart towards those who are oppressed, and that we, maybe not so much when we come off the freeway, try to not make eye contact with the one holding the cardboard sign, because we don't know what they're going to spend the quarters of dollars when they put it in their hand. We don't know what they're going to spend it on. We don't know if it's going to be something good for them or help them, or are we supporting a drug habit? We don't know. If it changes our heart a little bit towards them, if it makes us more mindful of those in our congregation who can't come to church, would love to come to church, can't come to church, and it changes our heart towards them and giving them calls and visiting more. I know that I'm absolutely so convicted by this. I'm in tears. I was in tears by this. If that changes our heart, then so be it. And I think that's what Jesus wants us to do. Because that's what we will be judged by, the transformation of our hearts. And if our hearts are transformed, that we do the things that Jesus outlines in this scripture, then so be it. But this is not a make you feel guilty sermon. This is a Thanksgiving sermon. This is a sermon where we go to our tables this week with abundant food, surrounded by those we love and care about, and are thankful for them. I tell you, I was in anticipation of preaching this sermon and knowing what I was going to wear. I was thankful for my warm bed. I was thankful that I have a roof over my head. I was thankful for Sue. I was thankful that I had people in my life. I was thankful for this church. And I was thankful for you. Whatever Jesus wants to do in us, all I ask is that whatever we do for one another, whatever we do to one another, we do it. We do it as if we are